All right, hey there, AP Europeans. We got one coming at you here. We've been talking about all the Protestant reformations that are going on, Calvin, Luther, Anabaptists, Anglicans, so much happening with this. But we do need to make sure we're looking at like what the Catholic version of this. There are some Catholic reformations, reforms that are coming into the mix of things. So here we go. So let me explain just a little bit about the terminology that's going on. There are two different ways to look at this. Uh, when I was a student back in the previous century, this was almost universally referred to as the Counter Reformation. That there is an idea that they're making a series of counter arguments to Luther and Calvin and everybody else that's challenging the church, that's protesting the church. But this is also just a Catholic Reformation because there are changes, there are reforms that the Catholic Church is going to make through this, although maybe it's not as much change as what somebody might expect there to be. So starting in the 1540s, and trying to make sure I'm keeping track of the timeline on this, by the 1540s, Luther and Calvin and the Anglicans and the Anabaptists, we're all talking like this has been around for decades. And so things are pretty well solid that that's there. The Catholic Church holds another one of these old council meetings where they bring the church leaders together. This is in the city of Trent, and they're not meeting consecutively for 18 years, but off and on they keep going back to Trent to kind of talk about like the process of things. Kind of name dropping Pope Paul III in here because he was the Pope like when this thing starts, but there's a couple of different popes that are involved with this. Um, Among the decisions that come out of the Council of Trent, one of them is the listing of the Index of Forbidden Books. The idea that books, thanks to the printing press, have been spreading these Protestant ideas for a couple of decades. Well, the Catholic Church wants to make sure that those ideas don't keep spreading to more and more people. So the message is clear. If you are going to be a good member of the Catholic Church, and if you like get one of these books in front of you, you need to understand this is strictly forbidden for you to read this because it is telling you the work of the devil. And this is kind of like Luther's writings and Calvin's writings, and when it comes down to sciencey stuff, people like Copernicus and Galileo, their writings show up in there. If you don't know who they are, that's okay. We'll talk about them here in a few weeks. But this is really designed to kind of limit the flow of information and kind of reaffirm the traditional authority and knowledge of being like, the church. The Catholic Church is kind of where people would go and like learn about much of anything, and books are posing a threat to that kind of authority, and so that was a problem here in the 16th century. Other than that, and even like with this, the Council of Trent is kind of reaffirming a lot of what's inside the Catholic faith. They do some cleaning up of some of the corruption, the pluralism and absenteeism, and like the immorality that's in the church. But the sale of indulgences doesn't really go away. They just kind of like make some adjustments to clean up that process. So the Council of Trent is significant in kind of like making some reforms, but the reforms are pretty limited when push comes to shove on this. With a little bit more impact on things, we'll get to that picture here in a second, there's a couple of new religious orders that are coming out, new sects within the Catholic Church. And this is where I think you see a little bit more of a Catholic Reformation with groups like the Jesuits that are as they're founded is like the Society of Jesus, and they're organizing themselves in 1540. They are reformers, but they are not trying to reform Catholic doctrine. They're trying to reform in the name of trying to get like some of the immorality out, and they're trying to make sure that they are trying to educate Catholics and going to be Catholic priests, students in the seminary studying to be priests, trying to make sure there's a proper education coming for them so they can better understand how to be a good priest, how to be a good leader within the church. Central figure on this, and this is kind of like he's here in the picture, is Saint Ignatius of Loyola. So I mean, he is here, and like the picture is kind of showing like him, like hands out into the crowd as the sick are brought to him, and people that are suffering from demonic possession are brought to him, and the evil spirits are being expelled out of these people. And it is like the work of God kind of flowing through Ignatius in the form of miracles. And this is something that starts to happen a little bit more, I guess, as far as the documentation of it, maybe a little bit more regularly here in this time period. We can maybe talk about the whys on that in a different topic. Ignatius also writes out a book called The Spiritual Exercises. It's kind of like a lesson book about what you need to know to be a good Catholic and to be a good priest. It's notable here that the Index of Forbidden Books is like the books that you shouldn't read. But here, Ignatius is kind of putting out a book that can do work for the church. And so it's not just about countering what's already there. It's about kind of like reforming and trying to spread some of the positive ideas from the church as well. The Jesuits are also involved in what they call the Roman Inquisition, trying to find the people that are really, kind of running counter to what the Catholic Church is saying and trying to get rid of that evil element in society. And then the Jesuits are also going to play a significant role in the New World. The Jesuit missions in Central and South America and Texas, this is a real part of the Christianizing of indigenous Americans that's going to go into the 16th into the 17th and 18th centuries. Another religious order that comes into play is the Ursuline Order of Nuns. Nuns were, there were such things as nuns before 1544, but this is going to kind of open opportunity for women to take a more active role in elements of the church. Women aren't allowed to be priests, but this is a way that they can have an active public life in some cases, or do private work to try to spread Catholic faith and Catholic doctrine. And so this is something in here in the 1540s. It kind of is going along with a lot of the changes that are out there, whether you're talking about a reaction against Calvinism or Anabaptists or Lutherans, or if you're talking about like maybe some of the changes that are happening in the role of women in society, which is actually part of what we'll see in topic 2.6. In general, the effects of this, there's two effects of this. The Catholic Church is stabilized. I think there was some concern that all this Protestant movement here in the middle of the 1500s was ultimately going to topple the Catholic Church, and it just didn't happen because of folks like Pope Paul and the Jesuits and the Ursuline nuns. The Catholic faith is going to kind of see a pretty good bounce back to things. But the other thing that happens in the long run is that the religious pluralism across Europe is kind of set in stone, because if you can follow my logic here, once you start entering into a debate with people that are of a different belief system than you are giving some credibility to their belief system. It's no longer just dismissing it as being a work of evil or the work of the devil. It is kind of approaching a logical order of thought to your religious beliefs. And this kind of opens the door for more denominations of the church to be created going through the 16th and 17th century and beyond. So religious pluralism is going to be a thing throughout Europe for, well, basically forever. Thanks for listening. This one was, a little bit different than what we've seen as we look at how the Catholic Church itself kind of responds to the protests and the reform movements against them. So, thanks.